It's the having to hold back on sharing on how we are doing out of shame. It's the having to hold back because we don't want to burden others with the heaviness of our stories. It's the having to hold back because we learn to be inauthentic and performative to survive in these relationships. It's always a question, even this one's actually one therapists will like a lot too, but is sort of talking about a kind of tell on whether a person's actually going through a narcissistic relationship. So much of what I have learned about narcissistic abuse, narcissistic relationship, frankly, has come from being in the room with clients and talking with large groups of people who are experiencing narcissistic relationships. I also pay attention to the public conversation about people in narcissistic relationships. And sadly, I do see that a lot of people who are in narcissistic relationships end up facing and having to endure a lot of doubt about their experiences within their relationships, with various sites out there and social media accounts wondering if people who are in narcissistic relationships are just playing the victim and are just walking through the world just calling everyone out as narcissistic just because they're disappointed by someone or angry at them, like things like, you won't do what I want you to do, so I'm going to call you a narcissist, that kind of thing, right? So, do some people use the term, the label of narcissism or narcissist or narcissistic as a hammer? And do they use it inappropriately? Absolutely. That's the era we're in. We're never going to create a world where everyone's going to use the damn term right. But here is what I have noticed, at least in the therapy room and in conversations and question and answer sessions that I do with folks, because it is something that really jumps out at me about survivors of narcissistic relationships. Ready? When a person who's going through a narcissistic relationship is talking with me, their opener is almost never that my fill in the blank is narcissistic. My wife, my husband, my partner, my mother, my father, you get it, right? It's almost never. In fact, when a person's actually going through a narcissistic relationship, here are the openers I most often hear. They'll say, I'm having trouble with my relationship and I'm so anxious about it. I don't know what to do. Or they say, nothing I'm doing seems to work these days. Or they say things like, I feel like I'm stuck in my 10-year-old self and I want to get out of my way, but I don't understand what's going on. Or just, I don't understand what's happening. Some people say, I feel crazy and I wanted to do something about it. Other people say, my partner keeps telling me that I'm the problem and told me to get therapy. Others say, I feel like I'm always complaining. Or I can't get it right and I want some help. Or I'm worried that I have borderline personality disorder, or maybe that I'm not the one who's narcissistic. Or is there something I can do differently? Or I'm anxious all the time and it's driving my family nuts. So sit with those things that I just say, because that's what I hear in the room. People who come in confused, wrecked, upside down, wondering if they are the problem. What I almost never hear is that someone plops down in my room and says, my husband's a narcissist, or Dr. Ramani, let me know how to deal with my narcissistic mother, or someone else saying, how come everyone I meet is narcissistic? We may get to that point over time, but that's almost never the opener. It was interesting. This question originally came to me through two therapists. They asked me, well, if a client comes in to talk to you and just says that the other person is narcissistic, isn't that putting them in a passive position? And that question was what reminded me that if a person is well into beginning to understand that someone around them is narcissistic, whoever it is, healthy people who know this, their main issue is still going to be anxiety, guilt, grief, confusion, and that heaviness of slowly recognizing that there isn't much they can do about it and all of the grief and the complex reactions around that. Nobody is ever happy to find out that someone they love is narcissistic. And as more people understand more about it, it's a heavy thing to recognize because we want to believe the best about the people we love. We want to be from loving families. We want to be in loving and trusting relationships. We want to work in safe workplaces. That's what we want. And people aren't saying, oh yeah, got it, mom's a narcissist. Yeah, I figured it out. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's happy about this. When a person recognizes that a person close to them, that they love, is narcissistic, and explores that, for example, in therapy, what tends to follow is even more self-doubt, more blame, more shame, as though by blaming ourselves, there is still that outside hope that it's us, that we aren't seeing it clearly, that we aren't giving them enough chances. Remember, I know a nice lady who wrote a book called It's Not You. What gets tricky, and I do run into this, is when the antagonistic and narcissistic people use the label for other people. Because quite frankly, those are the folks who have quite regularly come into my therapy room and said, everyone around me is narcissistic. And that is their opener. Or they'll say things like, nobody is ever fair to me, or nobody's nice to me, or I do so much for people, nobody appreciates me. And that's when I may cock my head a little and ask more pointed questions. In a way, knowing someone is narcissistic is the best, worst thing you could learn. It's important because otherwise you could easily sacrifice your entire life trying to please an unpleasable person. However, it's also devastating because the vast majority of people navigating and healing from these relationships are compassionate, kind, patient, empathic people who just wanted to be part of a balanced and loving relationship, nothing more. And to learn about personality styles like narcissism and what it means about a relationship going forward. Sure, it clarifies what's already happened in the relationship, but losing hope about someone you love, something you belong to, about the future, all of it, is devastation. So, and pointedly I say this to any therapists out there who are watching this and who wonder, is the narcissism label something people are just using to get a free pass? My question would be, a free pass to what? There is no narcissistic abuse reparation fund out there. People who go through narcissistic abuse actually don't always get a lot of sympathy from other people and are often questioned, shamed, and lambasted for even pondering if someone they care about or love or in their family is narcissistic. Maybe it's the free pass to not having to take responsibility, but yet that doesn't hold up because the majority of survivors blame themselves endlessly. So it actually seems that most survivors of narcissistic abuse are really good at taking too much responsibility. Nobody wants narcissism in a close person around them to be true in their lives. It would be easier to learn and a person you care about who may be treating you badly actually has something happening for them that's manageable, an illness like depression or something like that. But when it is narcissism, it's an important piece of information that can help set someone free, whether they stay or go, and get them out of the imprisoned loops of self-blame. And it's not easy. And trust me, the folks going through this are not going through the world and saying everyone's narcissistic. By and large, long-term narcissistic abuse undercuts our sense of trust in ourselves and our perceptions. We'll typically doubt that we are reading situations clearly and correctly and second-guess ourselves in social situations all the time. We may feel in our bodies when we are around these patterns, but even then, we'll even doubt those sensations and pathologize ourselves. So to the folks out there who think, oh, come on, isn't everyone a little narcissistic? No. Or are all of us saying everyone is narcissistic? Actually, the people who are going through narcissistic abuse the worst are the ones who are least likely to say it's happening to them. In a very specific situation where you self-gaslight yourself by blaming yourself for being tired. So this topic, it's actually very niche, but it's real, and it came out of as always, people I'm talking with. And once I had that conversation, I was actually struck by how often I do see it, and it's a pattern I see consistently, is that people in all relationships, and this goes beyond this tired piece, but people are very much blamed, or at least given the equal burden of blame for what is going wrong in a narcissistic relationship, right? We very much live in a two to tango relationship world. And while I recognize that it's not as simple as the narcissistic one is the one who is bad and is doing the bad things and the other person in the relationship is perfect, it's not that. The fact that most people in narcissistic relationships, A, were being emotionally abused, and B, do not understand what they were dealing with, means that the relationship was an uneven and tricky playing field for a long time. So there's no two to tango. It just was incredibly unjust. So we know that self-blame is a key element of what happens to people in narcissistic relationships. Again, I don't need to belabor that here. People in narcissistic relationships will sit and ruminate and wonder, what am I contributing to this unhealthy dynamic? What am I doing wrong? What am I working through here? Am I working through my dark side? Maybe I brought this through. Maybe I have bad intentions and I attracted this nonsense. You know the drill. And then the self-blame becomes even more basic. Things like, well, I haven't been at my best lately anywhere. And you may even think, well, I am also always exhausted and tired. And even if you do understand narcissism and how it shows up in relationships, that you may believe that you may be part of the problem in this relationship because you're always tired. In fact, it is likely that the narcissistic person may even give you jabs about, why are you always so tired? And you may feel that that's part of why your relationship is struggling, because you're always tired or depleted or exhausted. Whatever word you use to describe, you're just sort of feeling completely drained and wrung out. And what happens then is that you are willing to internalize the blame. Maybe the relationship isn't working because I'm tired, I'm always exhausted, I don't have it in me to leave or to fix it. And instead of the radical acceptance of, this whole thing is not healthy and it's not going to change, you are instead in a situation of, maybe I am part of the problem, I'm always so tired, or I don't have the energy to devote to this relationship because I'm so tired. I'm willing to bet that the relationship is what took your energy away. One thing I am always struck by is how energized people are when they are away from the narcissistic person, when the narcissistic person's not home, when you live away from them for a minute. In fact, you will see that the people who get out of these relationships for a minute become quite animated, and you're having a nice time when you're not having to spend time with the narcissistic person. And then when the time is coming, maybe that you have to go back home, or they're coming back from their trip, or Sunday night comes and you have to go back to work, or the family visit is once again on the horizon, that tiredness sets in. It's not the tired of not getting enough rest or enough sleep. It's a tiredness in your soul. But the tiredness paradox is such that you start to think that you are part of the problem. Saying, I'm the problem, I'm tired. So why not trace that backwards? What is the source of your tired? It may not just be the narcissistic relationship. It may also be other stressors, caregiving, child rearing, not getting enough sleep, long work hours, competing responsibilities, unrealistic demands. But ultimately, because by definition, narcissistic relationships are not supportive, and in fact, people often find that they are doing far more than their share for no other reason in these relationships than to keep the peace and get the narcissist off their back. You have multiple pathways of tired, but the helplessness and the hopelessness of the narcissistic relationship result in a sort of soul tired. But be very careful and catch yourself when you call yourself complicit in your own narcissistic abuse that's happening to you by labeling yourself as tired and saying, well, maybe this has happened because I'm not my best self in this relationship because I'm tired. I'm not sure that anyone's best self is ever going to be safe in a narcissistic relationship. And there is no nap or good night's sleep in the world that will lift that chronic tiredness you have when you're in a narcissistic relationship. You being tired is not why this relationship is unhealthy. Them being manipulative, invalidating, and betraying you is the issue. Remember that. Let me ask you what you think. What's the hardest question you will ever ask yourself in a narcissistic relationship? Drop it in the comments. What do you think that would be? What's the hardest question you would ever ask yourself in a narcissistic relationship? Okay, writing them down, getting them in the comments. Okay, here you go. Ready? Here's the hardest question. What do you like about the narcissistic person in your life? Simple question, right? So answer it. You're watching this channel most likely because you have or recently had a narcissistic relationship. What was it? What did you like about them? And you're like, it's a tough one, right? This is an exercise that I often have used with clients who are very clearly trauma bonded in their relationships, especially with romantic partners. Those relationships are good and bad, up and down, break up, make up, argue about the same thing repeatedly, avoid conflict, walk on eggshells, feel guilty. Mix all that up, what do you got? A toxic relationship. So the question I ask them, because let me put it, they're clear that this is not healthy, that it's not good for them, that they're not even enjoying the relationship anymore, but they still keep going back. So I ask them, what do you like about them? And the kinds of answers, sometimes they're saying, I can't end it, all right? I love them. And sometimes I'll even ask you, what do you love about them? But really I want to know, what do you like about them? Typically I'll get crickets for a minute, a little bit of that uncomfortable shifting in the chair, looking off into the distance, a little bit of a pursing of the lips. And then I'll get an answer like, well, like, why does anyone like anyone, right? Like, yeah, I like them, I love them, right? To which I usually say, no, I really don't know. Tell me. That's why I ask the question. Or the other answer I'll get is, I don't know. It's just something. I don't know. It's like a connection, right? I don't know. I just like them. I just love them. Okay. Or sometimes I like them because they get me. Then I ask, tell me more about that. What do you mean that they get me? And the answer I'll get back is, like I feel they get me, like they understand me, and that's hard to find. I push back on that answer, and that's what I think I'm being paid for, to push people to get to have uncomfortable conversations. What do you mean? I still don't get. What do you mean they get you? And then it gets more uncomfortable. But when I ask people, what do you like about them? Sometimes people will say, well, we have some shared interests, shared origins. I don't know, we're both from Georgia. We're both from New York City. We both go to the same church. We both love our golden retriever. We're both science geeks and we love to geek out. So sometimes the answers are around a few shared rhythms, shared interests, shared professions, that kind of thing. But it still doesn't answer the question. You both have a golden retriever. Still doesn't answer the question. What do you like about them? It's an interesting exercise. Because for a minute, what I'd love for all of you to do is think about someone in your life who isn't antagonistic, who isn't narcissistic. What do you like about them? I'm guessing there the answers come flowing. Oh my gosh, what do I like about the laughter? We go on these adventures. They listen to me. I'm doing this right now and I'm thinking about my own favorite people. And my answers are things like, what do I like about them? Gosh, they're so kind and we've always been there for each other. And I feel so safe with them. And I think they feel the same about me. And we make each other laugh. They let me be without me. I don't feel judged. I can say what I need to, and not feel like it's ever going to be a thing. I look forward to seeing them. They don't mind that I like to play silly games on my phone. They don't mind that, like, my idea of a fun Saturday night is like just going to bed early and playing my games on my phone. So when you cut to the core of it, the people we like them because we feel safe, happy, seen, heard, and cherished. We like people because we like ourselves with them. The stuff we like about someone is the stuff that makes a relationship last. The magical woo-woo, I don't know, it's just something magical about them. I don't know, that's the stuff that often makes you ruminate and self-devalue and live in the cycle of highs and lows. And when we are with the narcissistic people in our lives, in general, we don't like ourselves. We internalize their projected self-loathing, and that's not a good feeling. It's kind of almost like psychological body odor that sticks to our clothes, and we're like, I don't like how I smell right now. I don't like this. In trauma-bonded relationships, we don't know why we like a person. That's a real ringer. If you extend this out of intimate relationships and into family or friends, when people ask you, why do you like your narcissistic parent or your narcissistic siblings? Your answers may be a bit more forthright since you didn't choose them, right? You may literally say, I don't like my sister, their family, so I'm sort of stuck with them. Or I don't like my mother, I'm stuck with them. There may be a frankness we're able to have when it's family. But some people who are still caught in the cognitively dissonant recognition may find this to be a difficult question. You know, some people will say, I like them because they're my family. Okay, but that really isn't a like thing. That's a fact thing, right? Asking yourself this simple question, what do you like about them, is really uncomfortable. It forces us to reckon with why are we hanging out with a person we don't like? It may take people to a place where they do admit, I don't like them. In fact, I can't stand them. But you know, kids, house, money, job, culture, religion, fear, you know the list. That doesn't mean you like them. But that honesty, doing the deep dive, forcing yourself to answer the question, why do you like them? It becomes really important because it can start snipping away at some of those trauma bonds. By asking yourself this question, it's not meant to force you out of the relationship, but rather to break out of justification cycles that result in you blaming you. And yes, for some of you, maybe opening your eyes a little wider, and in some cases perhaps even giving yourself permission to leave, or at least put up some really big boundaries. When you don't do this reckoning, really look into what it is you like, you can really break into a cycle of rationalization. But when you do admit it, you do get to dig a bit deeper. You may say, I don't like them. I guess I stay out of a sense of obligation, guilt, fear, hope, or my own fear that I'm going to be alone. That you own that the thing that is holding you back and can work on that. That's not easy, rather than believing that there's a there in your relationship. Radical acceptance is about the recognition that there isn't really a there, that you don't like them, or don't like much about the relationship, and are also scared about what that means. Those fears are human, but addressing those fears is what growth is about. So the simplicity of this is deceptive. This question, what do you like about them? It may be the hardest question you will ever ask yourself in this relationship. Ever say this to someone who asks you, everything's fine, and smile through the pain so you wouldn't have to take care of their pain? Let's talk about this. People who are in narcissistically abusive relationships, not only have you had to do the sort of seemingly impossible task of having to adjust to long-term psychologically abusive situations, you also have to live and get through and navigate the world at large, right? There may have even been a time when someone asked you how are you, and you've been honest. Like, for example, a person just says, hey, how you doing? And your response would be like, it's been tough. Or maybe you were trying to explain what was happening with a toxic parent or a toxic spouse or partner or a toxic boss. And then you may start to try to share with them some of what's happening in your life. Some people listening to you may be quiet when you tell them because they don't know what to say. Some folks, as you share this with them, may feel helpless because there's nothing they can do. And some people may look at you a little sideways, like, wait, what? Like, come on, like, can't you just talk to them? I don't understand. Like, why would they yell at you if you were just trying to help them? Like, people just don't get it. And ultimately, you may learn to not really ever answer the other person's question about how you are feeling honestly, because it's just too hard. And frankly, you may not even want to give them the honest answer because now you may even feel bad. Now the other person's uncomfortable. The nature of lots of people in narcissistic relationships is that you feel compelled to take care of other people, even if you barely know them. Now, over time, you may feel stranger and weirder and odder because nobody gets what you're going through. So you start to get really good at answering that question that people ask you. Hey, how are you? How's everything going? And you say, everything's great. I'm good. Yeah, everything's fine. And you smile through the hurt and the anger and the confusion and the pain and the general upset. And you say, I'm great. I'm great. Everything's great. Yeah, things are going great. And you do that so you don't have to explain the unexplainable. So you don't have to be the explainer of a narcissistic relationship. Maybe to some people out there who believe that everyone can be communicated with if you're just clear enough, or that families have each other's backs. And maybe all of these things happen because it's just a misunderstanding. And frankly, sometimes people do get it, but they feel helpless. And there's nothing to be done, and they know it. I myself have even felt like this with clients whose situation was sort of seemingly impossible. But survivors are in a terrible position because not only are they living through an impossible situation and feel eternally helpless and hopeless, but they also may even feel compelled to not tell other people because they know they will feel helpless and awful. Or you may not even want to be the person who bursts their bubble because they like holidays and family get-togethers and seemingly normal, likable stuff. The inauthenticity of the survivor's life goes beyond the inauthentic lives we have to live in these relationships. It extends into the larger landscape of very rarely ever being able to share what's going on with other people who ask you how you're doing. Maybe because you don't want them to feel helpless too, because you know there's nothing they can do about it, because you know talking about it is not going to change anything, and that at some point there's almost a terrible stew of shame for being in this kind of a relationship or being from this kind of family, a helplessness and an existential hole that pervades your life if you are in one of these relationships, and especially if there's no easy way out, and then you find yourself having difficulty in getting the social supports you need because you don't want someone to have to hear your helpless, sad, demoralizing story that has no solution, and then they feel bad themselves. In essence, you may feel that there's no place to turn because you don't want to be a burden. And that is what we're told all along in these relationships, that we're a burden. That we're a burden if we want something for ourselves, or express a need, or a want, or a preference, or a hope, or an aspiration. That we're a burden, that we are the problem. So we sure as hell don't want to invite that from other people. It's how many of us who have had one narcissistic relationship get pulled into other narcissistic relationships. We're more likely to get stuck in relationships where we cannot express our needs or who we are and not question it. The overdeveloped empathy of people in narcissistic relationships is largely a safety response. The idea that if we cared enough, if we took care of the narcissist enough, then maybe they would stick around or see us or care for us or really see us clearly. Most survivors become really good at empathy in an attempt to survive. And then that overdeveloped empathy muscle meant that we may not even feel that we can share about our narcissistic relationships with other people. So we don't give them something to think about or deal with, or even just muddy their view of the world. Our hypervigilance and our hyperempathy for other people means that when it's all said and done, there's very little left for ourselves. So many survivors become masterful at the "everything's fine, how are you?" I personally have the very well-rehearsed, "oh, I'm doing great, things are great." Sometimes I'll mix it up with a little, "oh, I'm so busy these days, you know how it is," but that's about as bad as I let it go. I can't count on one hand the number of folks who can hear not so good with an open heart. That small number of folks who know my whole backstory. Listen, none of us want to be the downer, the bummer, the person who always has a gray cloud over our head. In fact, fun fact, I will often study how seemingly normal-ish people from what I know to be normal families and who have normal relationships go through the world and respond to "how are you?" and how they spontaneously say things like, "oh my gosh, so great, things are so great," and they'll say, "I'm amazing." And I suppose now that I started thinking about this video, maybe not all of them are telling the truth either. I also know that there's a whole world of pop psychology type coachy folks who will say that if you can just say that you're great, then you'll feel great. Well, I can speak on behalf of most survivors to say that's not true. It's not just a double-edged sword what happens here. It's a multi-bladed sword. It's the having to hold back on sharing on how we are doing out of shame. It's the having to hold back because we don't want to burden others with the heaviness of our stories. It's the having to hold back because we learn to be inauthentic and performative to survive in these relationships. And when things get really hard, at some point, you do sometimes hit that wall where you just can't smile anymore. And you just can't lie anymore. And you also can't bear to tell people the truth. So what happens then? You hide and you isolate. Ironically, one of the key tools for healing is social support. But what if that goes away or becomes inaccessible? Because it also feels simultaneously too precarious to be honest with other people about how your life's going. The performative, "I'm fine," has its place. Work, the coffee shop where you can get your coffee or tea, the conversational filler. But it is important that you are aware of your answer to that question for yourself. And no, not everyone you know gets to hear the truth, because most people can't handle it or frankly are not interested. But I ain't buying some BS positivity angle that if you say you're happy, then you are. Because when we are too performative and too inauthentic, it catches up with us. Once again, I wish I had some magic answer here. There are other ways of expressing ourselves when we can't tell people how we are, like writing it down or safe spaces to share it like a therapist who gets it and can hear it. But it can get really lonely really fast when we go through a world where we simply feel that we almost never are able to answer the question, "how are you?" honestly. So I'm on a bit of a David Kessler tear lately. David's an amazing, amazing grief expert and a friend. And I went to one of his lectures recently. And grief is so central to the process of working through healing from narcissistic relationships. So I'm always trying to learn more about it. He said something, though, that stuck in my mind that I think is really worth us sort of analyzing on this channel, which is the mind would rather feel guilty than helpless. Now, this is the core of what so many survivors go through. Remember, David Kessler's work is very focused on the grief following death. But I actually think that this line may apply even more so to people in narcissistic relationships. I'm always struck by how much guilt plays a role and a barrier in the healing process of survivors of narcissistic relationships. When I work with clients, I ask them, and they tell me they feel guilty. I ask them, tell me what it is you think you did wrong. Because really the sense of guilt is predicated on the perception that we did something wrong. We do something wrong, we feel guilty. So here's a list of things that people have typically said to me when I ask them what they thought they did wrong in the narcissistic relationship. They said, maybe I should have been more forgiving. Other people told me I should be more forgiving. Maybe I was asking too much and being too demanding. Maybe I wasn't good at communicating myself clearly. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm the issue because I actually am the one who didn't leave. I did end up going back. I feel bad for leaving. I feel bad for staying. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. Hey, you can go into the comments and share what you felt guilty about in your narcissistic relationship. And then let's step back and widen that lens. You feel bad, you feel guilty, and yet you were the one who was being manipulated, gaslighted, shamed, blamed, betrayed, emotionally abandoned, emotionally controlled. So you're being abused and you feel bad and guilty. That is the definition of a mind F, right? And the feeling bad, that's the guilt part. And obviously it's one of the cores of the self-blame people experience in these relationships. As long as you feel guilty, the relationship can persist because then you're the problem and then you can fix it. The day that that guilt lifts, well, that's a tricky day because then you also need to see the relationship clearly. That this person is treating you badly, that it's not okay, and that it's been happening for a long time. And whether you stay or go in the relationship, that has to be acknowledged. And then that old cognitive dissonance comes in and it's really uncomfortable. Strangely, guilt may be more comfortable than feeling that dissonance. And that takes us to what David said, that guilt may be more comfortable than helplessness. And that word, helplessness, is at the core of our experience of the narcissistic relationship. Nothing you do works. Whether you talk more, talk less, act for nothing, be small, don't exist, exist only when they want, be what they want, try to read their mind, be everything, be nothing, do everything, make their life easy, succeed, but don't succeed too much so they don't feel threatened. No matter what, no matter if you do none of those things, all of those things, it's still never enough because it's not possible, nor is it good for you. No person should be stuck in a position of having to try to please another person and believe that that is love. It's not. That is subjugation. Giving up on yourself so someone else can feel better about themselves, that, again, is subjugation. But feeling helpless is awful. It's one of the last stops on the train before depression. It's also a major part of grief. When we think about the grief around someone's death, we may get lost in thoughts about, if only I had driven them myself, if only they didn't skip that doctor's appointment, if only I had spent more time with them, if only, if only. And when someone has passed, David would call all of that if onlying part of the bargaining phase. We can't bring them back. In a narcissistic relationship, all that if only is, if only I didn't say that, if only I had had a different parent, if only I hadn't fallen for the love bombing, if only I had paid attention to my gut, if only I had not picked up their phone that day. Our if onlys are not just about things we wish we hadn't done or said, but they are also about how life could have been different if we didn't have to deal or develop around a relationship like this. And all of that leaves us feeling helpless. Ultimately, we often feel helpless because we can't change our narcissistic relationships. And in many cases, these people with these personalities are people we did or do feel love for, parental love, romantic love, friendship love, or even a sense of loyalty. And we want it to work. And we tried everything. And ultimately, we cannot change them. And that is such a heavy feeling of helplessness, and then more grief. The idea that there is something we can do can feel very affirming. And this is where narcissistic relationships really have us in a catch-22. We feel guilty, despite us being the ones who are abused and harmed, and we feel helpless, because there really is nothing we can do to change them. Neither feeling is good, but the guilty part, that's a distortion. The helplessness is more real. Staying in a relationship because you have hope is not a bad thing. Leaving a relationship that isn't working is not a bad thing. Not being able to read someone else's mind is not a bad thing. But coding it as you are the one doing something wrong, that's the part that keeps you stuck, and over time, it makes you sick. The helplessness is honest. You can't change them. And interestingly, the guilt part may delay the grief, which kind of feels good because it's a painful feeling, because you're still doing and doing and doing. But the helplessness, that propels you into grief. Grief is human and normal and a necessary part of letting go and moving forward into your life. It's a universal part of being a human being, and it's not just reserved for death. It's for loss. And even if you stay in the relationship, in a narcissistic relationship, there has been a loss of what you thought the future would be, of your love story, of your narrative, of your hope for what they could be. That's a lot to lose. And so you grieve it. Helplessness is also about humility and recognition of the limits of a situation. And narcissistic relationships are all about limitations and what can be done. Stay or go, there's grief. And so allow it to flow. There is another side, and it won't always feel hard. But remaining in the guilt can keep you from your true, authentic self for years. And the world needs you. Can't have you hiding away from us. There is no worse crossroads than the intersection of grief and helplessness. But maybe the middle road is realistically seeing these relationships for what they are. Instead of helplessness, you get to clarity. Thanks again.